So this will not be the most important of all of the talks from my standpoint. You just heard the most important for the Jnana Yoga. What I would consider the most important will come on Saturday. But all of them are important, as all of his are important, and all of these on yoga are important also. But this particular one is about Kriya Yoga, which is extremely important in Patanjali's system, and about the Kleshas, which are the problem before us. Kleshas are the pain-bearing obstructions, those things that cause us problems, the root of our bondage. And so bondage and understanding bondage and the dynamics of bondage and so forth is important if we want liberation. But of course, it's not the most important thing. One of our Swamis once, many years ago, I heard he gave, I think it was a 20-part series of Sunday talks on, or a 28-part series of Sunday talks on obstacles to meditation. So after 28 one-hour lectures on Sunday about obstacles to meditation, who's ever going to try it? Why in the world would you want to try something where you could describe the problems for 28 Sundays? So we're not going to do that, but we do have to go over the Kleshas to know what they are and how they work. Now there are some. My own teacher in yoga, and also a famous Western authority in yoga who passed away several years ago, 2012, Georg Feuerstein. Both of them, my teacher independently and Georg Feuerstein also, said that there are two systems taught in the Yoga Sutras. And one system is original with Patanjali, and the other is more or less an insertion that he himself made. There's some scholars who say, no, somebody else threw it in there, but no, they believe that Patanjali himself included it, but it was another system he was including. And the strange thing is that the other system which has been included has become the most famous and the system by which yoga is identified. And so the system they believe was added in by Patanjali himself, but from another source, was the Ashtanga Yoga, the 8 limbs of yoga. And that's what people, when they think of Patanjali's yoga, they think of the yamas, the niyamas. If you don't know these terms, don't worry, because we'll discuss them on other days, because they are important. The yamas, the niyamas, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, and samadhi. Those are the 8 limbs of yoga. And so these authorities, this is my teacher, who is, he's a very intellectual man, a spiritual man. He says if he's mastered anything, it's the system of yoga. And so he said, and Georg Feuerstein, who is a scholar as well as a practitioner, also said that that was a system which they feel, from internal evidence within the Yoga Sutras, that was, as Georg Feuerstein says, that was a book I just got. That was in the morning that was delivered to me. I had time to read this much. That the Ashtanga Yoga was, quote, he said it's like a quote that he puts into his work. But Kriya Yoga, both teachers say, is Patanjali's original system, or one which is original to yoga. So by saying that, I don't mean to denigrate the Ashtanga Yoga. That's what yoga is known as now, as Ashtanga Yoga. And it is important. There was a reason why it was added in, why Patanjali put it in. But it is strange that that's what has become identified as yoga, whereas Kriya Yoga is hardly discussed by people. It's much less known. So we'll go over Kriya Yoga now, and also the Kleshas, because in Patanjali they come together at the beginning of chapter 2. This morning what I spoke about were the first 4 sutras in chapter 1, which defines the essence of yoga, that is stopping the fluctuations of the mind, which allows the seer to know itself in all of its glory, not by an intuitive act of understanding, but by direct awareness, full awareness of the infinitude of oneself, of one's self as infinite consciousness. And so that was in the first chapter. Now we come to the second chapter. In a 4-day retreat, it's not possible to cover all of the Yoga Sutras, and so I don't plan to even try to do that. I'm selecting parts of the Yoga Sutras that are very important. And so today, the Kriya Yoga and the Kleshas. Tomorrow morning and evening, I'll speak about the 8 limbs of yoga, which again are also important. Then on Saturday, I'll speak about abhyasa, practices for yoga, aside from what we're going over as far as the structure of yoga. And then on Sunday, yoga itself. Or actually, I think Saturday is yoga and Sunday is a practice. So then Sunday is the most important part. So, Kriya Yoga and Ashtanga Yoga. So what is Kriya Yoga? He says in the beginning of Sadhana Pada, the first chapter is called Samadhi Pada, the chapter on concentration. And Samadhi being, of course, the ultimate concentration, but it's the chapter on concentration as it's known. And the second chapter is Sadhana Pada, the chapter on practice. So as I said in the first class, the first 4 sutras, it said that that's the essence of yoga. If you understand from that, you've understood everything there is to know. If that's enough, if you read that, think about it, internalize it, and you realize the truth of it, actually realize it, then you've realized the goal of yoga. Nothing else is needed. But the rest of chapter 1 deals with other aspects, or aspects of concentration, the types of waves in the mind, how to control the waves of the mind, etc. And then this chapter deals with Kriya Yoga, primarily with Kriya Yoga, the Kleshas, and the Ashtanga Yoga. So the first sutra in the second chapter is Tapaswadhyayeshwara Pranidhanani Kriya Yoga. That is, it says that Kriya Yoga means, and let me, I was going to use this, so let me start writing up here. I know that everyone can't see this, but some can see it, and others can see it afterwards. So, we have Kriya Yoga, and it is tapas, self-study, which is swadhyaya, and surrender to God, Ishvara Pranidhana, or devotion to God is also a possible translation of Pranidhana, devotion or surrender to God. In fact, surrender is the more common translation. So Kriya Yoga means these 3. And he says in the next sutra, he says, Samadhi Bhavanartha Klesha Tanu Karanarthascha. That the purpose of Kriya Yoga is the attainment of Samadhi, ultimate concentration, and also to attenuate, that is to minimize, to weaken the Kleshas. And then he defines the Kleshas. So now first let me say something about these 3. Tapas, which means austerity. Self-study or swadhyaya, and devotion or surrender to God, Ishvara Pranidhana. These 3 you find in another place in the Yoga Sutras. In fact, in the Yoga Sutras, as you study them, you find that there's a lot of cross-referencing between sutras and chapters. So these 3 are also found where? In the niyamas. In the Ashtanga Yoga, you have the yamas, which are the moral disciplines, and then you have the niyamas, special disciplines, which are shocha, cleanliness, shocha, santosha, contentment, and then tapaswadhyaya ishvara pranidhana are the niyamas. So these 3 are 3 of the 5 niyamas. The other 2 are cleanliness and contentment. Those are considered disciplines necessary for the practice of yoga. So these three obviously assume importance. And those of you who know, I'm sure many of you know of, the Self-Realization Fellowship, Paramahansa Yogananda's organization, they teach Kriya Yoga. Now this does not mean the tradition of Paramahansa Yogananda, not that there's any conflict between this and what he taught. What he taught was a type of Kriya Yoga. But this is a generalized Kriya Yoga. This is the general principle of Kriya Yoga. And Kriya Yoga means yoga that is done, the yoga carried out in action, yoga which is to be performed. And so these are the foundational practices of Patanjali's system of yoga. Again, the Ashtanga Yoga, which also he uses, which he introduces into his system, that gives much more detail, and we'll come to that tomorrow. But this is the basis of his system. So he says that the purpose of this is attainment of Samadhi, and attenuation, meaning making powerless or less powerful, of the Kleshas. And the Kleshas are the pain-bearing obstructions. Those pain-bearing instructions, meaning obstructions to yoga, obstructions to happiness, obstruction to ultimate well-being, and the sources of pain. The sources of pain. Now that doesn't mean pain in our present-day sense, where pain is all the things that we don't like. It means even the things that we like come to be seen as painful, because they limit us, because they are not fully satisfying, because they come to an end, because they're not ultimately satisfying. So it's like what the Buddha meant when he said, Sarvam dukkham dukkham. Everything is misery, everything is misery. Well, you say, well, everything's not misery. Sometimes I'm unhappy, but a lot of times I'm quite happy. What's the matter? So no, Buddha didn't mean that everybody walks around like this all of the time and feeling absolutely miserable and depressed, and that that's the only state that there is possible in life. No, he meant that even our happiest experiences, eventually we find, are not enough. They're not enough. And the hoping that they're going to be enough is a cause of our misery, is a cause of misery. The hoping, the vain hope that our best experiences in ordinary life, the vain hope that those are going to be enough, they're going to fill that void within us, that is a cause of misery. And so that's why they are also miserable. Not because they're miserable in the moment, but because the fact that we think they're going to be enough leads us on to go after them again and again and again and again, and coming up short every time. I've never really known, because I haven't seen it in a original document, but Einstein is always credited with that statement, and so it's probably true. But in the days of the internet and alternative facts, you can't always be sure. But Einstein is credited with the statement, something to the effect that doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is the definition of insanity. And so that's the definition of us. So we're all insane. We're all doing the same thing over and over, thinking that this time it's going to be enough. And it's not. And then some people learn that it's not, and then they just become bitter. So that's why it's said that why the Buddha said everything is rooted in suffering. Everything is suffering, even our happiness and joys. Now that is why also Western thinkers have often said that the East is basically pessimistic. All Indian thought, Hinduism, Buddhism, it's all pessimistic, rooted in pessimism. And then you ask them further about, well, why? And I've actually heard this. I've actually heard this from top thinkers in the West. They'll say that, well, yes, of course there's a lot of unhappiness, and of course all of that. But in the West, we believe that you just make the best of it. You just go out there and make the best of it. Of course, it's it's unsatisfying, all of that. But you make the best of it. That is optimistic. It's optimism to think that there's no way out of this? That's amazing to me. They don't see the contradiction. So no, at least Buddhism and Hinduism say there is a way beyond it. And they also don't say that it's not that your ordinary experiences are bad. It's not that Vedanta doesn't say, and Buddhism doesn't say it either, that if you get a good piece of chocolate that you're supposed to spit on it and say, no, I don't eat anything that tastes good because I want to be miserable. No, you could continue to take the experiences that come to you as you did before. But you no longer think that out of this experience it's going to fill the void in my heart. Because it doesn't do that, it's not going to do that, but now you know it. Now you know it. So now you don't expect that from the experiences you have. So you can take experiences for what they are. You can have them for what they are. That's a far better state, even long before realization, even long before you attain to Samadhi or the direct vision of God or the direct knowledge of the self, whatever. Long before that, it makes life much more meaningful, much better. Because you're not looking for things in life that life is never, ever going to give you. Another example, we think that we go through the whole of life like this, thinking that, well, I've got this problem in front of me, I've got this bill to pay, and I don't know how I'm going to do it because I've got to use money for something else and everything. But along with that, we think, but once I take care of that, then it's going to be smooth sailing. And it never is. You take care of the problem right in front of you, and 5 more problems have come around the corner and are gaining speed on you. And you take care of them, and then 10 more problems are coming towards you. And that's from childhood till the end of life, till the time we die. That's life. And so one of the great things spiritual life does for you, aside from realization, that may sound far off or whatever, the full realization, that may sound far off. We'll put that aside for a moment. Just the fact that you don't expect from life things that life is not going to give. And just the fact that you no longer think that by solving a problem, life is going to be full sailing. No, you realize, okay, this is another problem. Just as I've taken care of other things, I'll take care of that. But I'm going to put my attention on something else. This I have to take care of. If I don't pay the bills, I'm not even going to be able to do my meditation or my yoga or whatever I do. So I'll pay my bills. I'll take care of things that I can. Take care of problems as they arise, but I know that that's not what's going to solve the problem of life for me. That has to come from somewhere else. That has to come from somewhere else. So this idea that the East is pessimistic and the West is optimistic, that's all nonsense, all nonsense. So Kriya Yoga and Ashtanga Yoga. These 3, tapas, austerity, that doesn't mean primarily what we think of in the West as mortification. The idea of mortification, which is is used as a synonym for austerity, but it's certainly not a synonym for tapas. Mortification of the flesh has the idea of punishing your flesh because the flesh is sinful. And you are sinful because you're born in sin, and so you should punish yourself before God gets a chance to do it for you. And that way you'll get out of some of the punishment that's supposed to come to you, because you deserve it for being a sinful sinner. But no, austerity doesn't mean that. Austerity means preserving the energy which you have. When you have the rays of the sun falling on the earth on a sunny day, unlike today, the sun is just falling on paper, on dried leaves and other things, and drying things out, but not and heating things up, but not much more. But you take a magnifying glass and you hold it in the sun and bring it to a focus, and you can light leaves on fire, you can light paper on fire, and such flammable materials, which is a delight to little kids who love fire anyway, and love setting things on fire. And so all you've done, you haven't taken anything new except for the magnifying glass, but that is only serves to focus what's already there. And so tapas is that which focuses the energy that you have. Focuses the energy that you have so that it's not all just dissipated like the rays of the sun falling randomly on earth. It focuses the rays of your mind, the energy of your body, etc. And so tapas means that which conserves and concentrates and redirects energy, practices. And so some of them, yes, some of them can be physical, like fasting, not fasting to cause pain to yourself, but like on special celebrations and so forth, you take a vow of fasting like Shivaratri, which is coming up in March. That from dawn till the next morning, I'm going to fast to show that I am not consumed by, or I am in control of my tongue. That I have that capacity to go without food for a day if I need to. So no, that doesn't mean that you enjoy going without food. It means that no, I'm going to show myself that I have that power to control myself. So it doesn't mean fasting for 40 days or anything like that. No, I'm going to fast for a day. I'm going to stay up to meditate, and I'm going to keep myself awake, just by keeping my mind alert, keeping vigil. So again, not to excess. Vedanta is never, and yoga do not condone excessive practices, which actually cause damage or pain to the body. But so there is austerity which is physical, like such practices. Or like, and then there's austerity which is verbal. There's austerity of the body, austerity of the speech, and austerity of the mind. So verbal austerity, being careful of your speech. There's that famous Vedic Shanti mantra, Om Vang Me Manasi Pratishtita Mano Me Vachi Pratishtitam. May my mind be one with my speech. May my speech be one with my mind. Meaning, may, when I say something, may my mind be in it, so that what I say I mean. I'm not just talking randomly. And may my speech be established in my mind. May my speech reflect that which I actually think. Let me not think one thing and say another. And so austerity of the speech means controlling my speech. It doesn't mean that you have to take a vow of silence, though that is one thing some people sometimes do in a limited way. Some of our teachers, like Swami Brahmananda, warned against doing that much because everyone has the desire for expression, and if you forcibly restrain your speech, you find that can have untoward consequences. In fact, Thomas Merton, some of you know of Thomas Merton, the great Christian monk, Trappist monk. He was something of an iconoclast and wrote, much to the embarrassment of some of the Orthodox members of the Trappist order, he wrote things that were quite revealing and somewhat critical of the Trappists. And one of them was that in the Trappists in the old days, they had a vow of silence. So once you entered the monastery, you never spoke. The only time you could speak was to the abbot, and otherwise you never spoke. And so he said that here you had people who had lived in the monastery for 50 years side by side, and they never got to know each other. Never got to know each other. They never matured emotionally because they never spoke, they never communicated, they never shared. And so they were emotionally stunted, they had other psychological problems and things because they just weren't ready for that. So again, control of the speech, control of the body, that all means in a relative way that is helpful and beneficial, not anything to the point where it's damaging. If you're lifting weights, you can pick up a certain amount of weight and you can lift it, you can press it, and it feels good. It's hard, you're straining, but it feels good. And you put it down, you're okay. You add more weights to it and you pick it up and you realize, I'm going to pop something. This is not good. So then you put it back down. So everything in life is like that. Austerity is like that. That which is good, that which helps you, then good. But don't overdo anything. So austerity, essentially, in the Vedanta and in the yoga tradition, austerity means just self-control. Why is self-control in everything? Why is self-control necessary? Because when we lose self-control, then we realize that, no, I've lost all of my dignity. I've lost all of my self-worth. We feel awful when we lose self-control. And when we see somebody else who's completely without self-control, we think, oh my God, that looks so ugly. I feel sorry for the person because when he realizes what he did tomorrow, he's going to feel awful. And so self-control is associated with an inner sense of dignity. So tapas is necessary just to lead a normal life. And it's even more necessary in a spiritual life. Again, just moderate control, keeping a sense of control over yourself. Sri Ramakrishna said, that there are different types of Ananda, of bliss. There's Vishoyananda, or to be Bengali about it as he was Bengali Bishoyananda. There's Bishoyananda, delight in sense objects. And then there is Samyamananda, delight in self-control. That's strange, delight in self-control. But no, if you have a little bit of self-control, you begin to realize that no, that gives you a sense of being established within yourself, not off balance and with your center out there somewhere. No, I have developed some inner dignity, and it gives a sense of joy, a sense of self-mastery. And then, of course, there's Bhajanananda, that is joy of worship of God, and then Brahmananda, the joy of the realization of God. But Samyamananda is an actual type of joy. So that's what we want through tapas, because we only have so much energy in life. And even if you want to do something like start a business, which is a good, fine thing, a legitimate thing to do, you're going to start a business, how much austerity you have to practice if you're going to start a business. You have to practice austerity to start a business if you want it to be successful. Or unless you have somebody who, a father or mother or somebody who gives you a business fully made by inheritance, but if you have to start a business of your own, you have to practice so much austerity. If you're going to start a family, if you're going to marry, if you're going to have kids, how much austerities you have to practice. Austerity is a part of life. So in spiritual life, it's no different. Austerity is an essential part of life. To lead a normal life, you're practicing austerities all of the time. And the person who can't control themselves at all, they're the most pitiable people and the most unfortunate and most unhappy people. So tapas is something which is quite natural. It's just that we practice it intentionally, knowingly in spiritual life, as we do in other fields, but we do it also in spiritual life. So tapas, self-study, swadhyaya, that's adhyaya means study, and swadhyaya means self-study. The swa, I didn't write up the Sanskrit word. The swa means self, so self-study, study of oneself. That has two meanings that's given in the yoga tradition. One is study of sacred texts on your own, the study that is internalizing the sacred texts. One of my teachers, in fact the same teacher who first taught me yoga, he used to say that whenever you read any sacred text of any kind, but especially with sacred texts, always read it with the idea, what does this mean for me? That is, put yourself within the text. Not just I'm reading all of these great concepts and things and about great saints who did all kinds of things and wow, wasn't that neat, wasn't that cool, wasn't that wonderful what they did. No, what does this mean for me? What does this have to say for me? What do I do with this? So that is self-study as you're studying sacred texts, putting yourself into the text, meaning taking the text and putting it in you. What does this say to me? What does this mean to me? And the other meaning of self-study, swadhyaya, is repetition of a mantra. Repetition of a mantra. It's in the first chapter of the Yoga Sutra, where Patanjali is talking about Ishvara, God. When he's talking about God, he says that the tasya vachakaha pranavaha, the word of God is pranava, which means Om. So the word of God is Om. That's the sacred word, the manifesting word of God is Om. And then he says, tad japas tadartha bhavanam. One should repeat it and meditate on the meaning of it. So this applies to any mantra. You should repeat it and meditate on the meaning. Now let me say that many people come to me after initiation and say, Maharaj, I was told that I was to repeat the mantra and meditate on the meaning, but nobody told me the meaning. Oh no, that's a very good question, and our Swamis rarely think to explain that to people because they don't realize that people wouldn't know it, but of course people wouldn't know it. Until you hear it, you don't know it. The meaning of the mantra of most mantras, is the meaning of the mantra of Sri Ramakrishna. The meaning of it is Sri Ramakrishna. The meaning of Ramakrishna's mantra is Sri Ramakrishna. The meaning of Holy Mother's mantra is Holy Mother. The meaning of Shiva's mantra is Shiva. Now, the form of a salutation like Om Namah Shivaya, Om salutations to Shiva. So there's a sentence-like meaning to the mantra, but most mantras, the meaning of the mantra is the devata, the ishta, that form of the divine that you're meditating on. So meditating on the meaning of the mantra means I think of the one whose name I'm repeating as present, as living, as conscious, as responding, as present within the sound itself. And so tad japas tadartha bhavanam, that should be repeated, and the meaning should be meditated upon. Tatat prakyak chetanadhigamo pyantaraya bhavascha. That from that repetition, Patanjali says in the next sutra, in the first chapter, he says, from that repetition, the mind is internalized, and one overcomes the obstacles to yoga. By repetition, the mind is internalized, and one overcomes the obstacles to yoga. Again, that all is contained within the idea of self-study. So self-study means studying the scriptures, but in the light of what does this say to me? What does it mean to me? And also the repetition of a mantra with the meditation on the meaning and so forth. So now I want to save plenty of time for questions this time. So let me write up quickly the Kleshas, and I won't be able to describe them all quickly. Well, I will describe them all quickly, but it won't be sufficient. But I'll do what I can now. And then we still have 3 more days. And so I'll adjust the topics so that I can get all of this in. So we have avidya. There are 5 kleshas. That is, again, the pain-bearing obstructions. Avidya, and I'll translate them. Asmita, avidya, asmita, raga. So I'm sorry, only people in the front will be able to see this. Dvesha, and oops, I almost wrote that in Devanagari. That won't help most of you. He, that's an H, believe it or not. Abhi, ni, vesha. So, the 5 kleshas are avidya, which is ignorance. Asmita means the I sense. That is the individualized I sense. The sense that I am, and I am separate. I am an individual. Raga means attachment. Dvesha means aversion. Abhinivesha means fear. Now, usually abhinivesha is explained as fear of death. And so that's the basic meaning of abhinivesha. But what about other types of fear? All types of fear are based on the fear of death. All types of fear are fear of loss, fear of destruction. You know, the most common of all fears people have is public speaking. And I have to admit, it's terrifying when you've got a terrible audience, frightful audience like you. So no wonder it's such a fearful experience for people. But why are we afraid of public speaking? Because there's the basic fear of, I'm going to fail and people are going to hate me. There's the fear of loss. There's the fear of destruction. It may not be the fear of death, because not many people have been recorded to have died during speaking. I'm sure there's some who have, but not many. But there is the fear of destruction, and so the fear of death is just the major destruction. So these are the kleshas, and Patanjali says that avidya. Let's see, where is it? Avidya kshetramuttaresham. Avidya is the source of all of the others. It's out of avidya, which means ignorance. Out of ignorance, all of the others come. It's out of that ignorance which he later defines as a mistake that we make in our perception, and the root of that mistake is taking the seen for the seer. That is the drishya. All that we see, taking that as identified with the seer. That is, I think this body and this mind, as Swami Atmarupananda was showing in his talk, that this body and mind, which I can see, but I take them as myself, as me. I am this body and mind. No, that's the fundamental mistake, and out of that come all of the other mistakes. So avidya is primary, and he defines that, and I'll go over that in just a moment. Out of that comes asmita, the sense that I am an individual. Once I've identified with the body and mind, out of this whole ocean of matter, I've identified with this. This is me. That's not me, that's not me, that's not me, that's not me. This is me. Once I've identified with this, then I have asmita, egoity, the sense that I am an individual. The sense that I am an individual. And out of that individualized sense, and this is part of Sankhya cosmology and Yoga cosmology, and I won't go into the explanation of this and the argument in favor of it because it's very technical and not immediately, it would take a long time and it's not immediately relevant to the practice we want to get to. Once that's out of that egoity, that the sense organs and the sense objects come. All that I perceive, they come out of egoity. Now that doesn't sound reasonable, or it doesn't sound self-evident, and I'm not going to try to explain it, and so you can ignore that for right now, but it is there in the Yoga Sutras, and it is in Sankhya philosophy. But it's because of this asmita, this thinking of myself as an isolated individual, psychophysical system, that I have raga, that is attachment to certain things. This is mine, that's mine, I want this. Oh, this is so desirable, I want to get that. Oh, I want to touch this. Oh, I want to taste that. Oh, I want to smell this. Oh, I want to look at this. I want to go here. I want to grab that, etc. That sense of attraction. And dvesha generally means hatred, but dvesha here means all sorts of aversion. All sorts of aversion. And abhinivesha again means fear. The root fear of death, but all types of fear, which are actually connected to the fear of death. And so these are the three kleshas, the pain-bearing obstructions, that we deal with all of the time in our ordinary psychology. But behind them are ignorance, that basic mistake we've made in our perception and thinking that we are connected to the objects of experience, and the egoity which comes with identification with the body and mind. Those are behind all of our experiences, and we are motivated by being attracted to some things, pushing away from some things, and running from some things. So think of these in terms of raga is running towards, I'm attracted towards. So that's movement towards. Dvesha is pushing against. I don't like this. I want to get rid of it. I don't like this. And bhaya or abhinivesha is fear from, and so it's running away. So one is attraction towards, another is pushing against, and the other is running away. So those are the three movements of the lower kleshas, and they all come out of that sense that I am an individual, body and mind, which is based on ignorance. And so it's said in the Yoga Sutras. In fact, it's said in the second half of that sutra I just read, that avidya kshetra muttaresham, that ignorance is the field of all of the others, or it's the source of all of the other kleshas. And it says, prasupta tanu vichinnodaranam, that the four states of the kleshas are this sleeping state where the kleshas are asleep, they're not active, and I'll explain that in a moment. Another is where they are made subtle, and that is what Kriya Yoga is meant to do, is to attenuate the kleshas so they're not so active. Another is vichinna, that is one klesha has pushed another, repressed another for the time being. And the last is udara, that is those who are fully manifested. So, like I see something that I'm attracted to, then that klesha of raga, of attraction, is fully manifested, is udara, or it's active. And the klesha of dvesha, of hatred, of aversion, that's suppressed. So it's vichinna, or suppressed for the time being. Again. So again, these five, they have these four states. There's a fifth state which I'll mention. One is the sleeping state when again, if I'm I'm feeling happy and peaceful, and I'm just sitting in my room. I'm not attracted especially to anything, and there's nothing that's exciting my hatred or whatever. Then these three lower, and I'm not afraid of anything, then the lower three, they are prasupta. They're sleeping right now. But they can be woken up in a moment's notice if I'm presented with a situation to wake them up. Tanu, meaning attenuated, that means that comes through practice, through spiritual discipline. Not just these three, these are the three given by Patanjali, but all spiritual discipline is making these kleshas attenuated. It's weakening them so that they have less power over us. The other two I already explained. Vichinna means one klesha has suppressed another klesha for the time being. So the suppressed klesha is called vichinna. And then udara means fully activated. I'm presented with something that I want or something I hate, and that particular klesha is fully activated. But there's a fifth state of the kleshas, and that's the dagdha bija, the burnt seed. So that comes through spiritual experience. That comes through viveka khyati, or samprajnana, that is knowledge which comes through spiritual experience. Through spiritual experience, the kleshas are actually burnt, and then they can no longer cause trouble. So for us who are spiritual aspirants, what we want to do is just to make these attenuated. So what does that mean in our everyday life? Because again, a lot of this sounds like, well, it's once again Vedanta and yoga and other spiritual systems just pouring cold water on everybody's party. You finally find something that's really attractive and nice that you want to have, and they say, oh, you got to give that up. You don't go after anything nice. And you finally find somebody you really love to hate, and now you're told you're not supposed to hate them. No, then life is no fun anymore. So no, the idea is that these raga, dvesha, abhinivesha in particular. Now these are, again, the root causes. We have to get to them also. But the lower ones are the ones that we can work on most easily first. And that is that once I can understand that when I see something attractive that I want, that I have lost control over the situation. It's not me that wants that thing. It's something which is pushing me and saying, you got to get it. Many times in our lives we see that there's something that's attractive, and I think, no, that's really not a good thing right now. It's not going to be good for me, or I don't have the money for it. I need to do something. But then there's something that keeps pushing me. No, I got to get it. I got to get it. Got to get it. So I'm not free. It's something that has taken over my freedom. And so I want to bring these under control, not so that I can't have anything beautiful or nice. I do want to get over hatred, and I want to get over fear completely. And I want to get over being driven by attraction also. But again, the idea is not so that you don't have fun. The idea is so that you have self-mastery. And so through austerity, you show yourself that no, I can be dignified. I have self-control. I don't have to be pushed around by these desires that come up and want to push me, even when I don't want to be pushed. No, I can exert self-control. I have self-mastery. It gives us a sense of stability. One of the beautiful New Age terms is being centered. You feel centered. Usually our center is out there somewhere, and we feel like we're a satellite circling around some point of gravitation out there. But no, I begin to feel that my center of gravity is here. My center of gravity is here. And yes, so I get something nice, I enjoy it. If I get something nice to eat, I enjoy that, and so forth. But I'm no longer driven about by random desires that just push me all over the place. And so through the practice of tapas, through the practice of self-study, swadhyaya, which turns the mind within, as you practice meditation and japa and other spiritual disciplines, and the mind begins to become internalized, you begin to feel a joy with the mind internalized. You begin to feel that, oh, this is nice. I like this. I want to enjoy this more. And then you find that that is more enjoyable than the things that you used to think so fun. And so the mind turns towards that more. And then the devotion or surrender to God, you begin to surrender the fruits of your actions to God. That is, you no longer think that success and failure are everything in life. I have to avoid failure at all costs, and I have to succeed at all costs. No, you realize that that's not in my hands. That's not in my hands. The fruits of my action are not in my hands. I can do everything right, and sometimes it just doesn't work out. And so I can become okay with that. It doesn't mean that you don't care what you do and you're sloppy about everything that you do, because who cares, who gives a damn, doesn't matter, just do anything, get it over with, get it over with. No. Even if you're doing things carefully and you're doing things right, sometimes things don't work out. And you realize, that's okay. That's okay. Life is not about success and failure. That's one of the messages that Sri Krishna says in the Gita over and over again in various ways. Siddhya siddhyo samokritva. Having become the same in success and failure. And in other ways he says the same. The labha labho, jaya jayo. In attainment and non-attainment, in conquest and victory, and in being conquered. Being the same in the midst of all of it. And so through spiritual practices, these become less. Through service and so forth, asmita becomes less. Through doing good to others, asmita, that is egoity, the sense that I'm a... Okay, time's up. Okay, yes, oh, it is up, and I will conclude with this. Thank you. I thought you were trying to fan me. Through service to others and so forth, then egoity is lessened, and through proper understanding, through processes like Swami Atmarupananda took us through, and other processes, through that our avidya is lessened. Avidya only disappears at the very end, then avidya disappears completely. But we begin to weaken it now, and through spiritual practice all of the kleshas become tanu, that is attenuated. And then through spiritual experience they become burnt up, and then eventually, and then we know the highest truth. So now let me open up for questions.
So that time gap between those kleshas and prayers, so how do we overcome that?
Yes, so how do we find that we have, like a simple example he gives, we have a cupcake, and I see it and I just want it and I start eating it. And so there's not much time gap between seeing the cupcake and grabbing it and eating it. There's a couple of things to say about that. That's a good question, a good example also. One thing is that Sri Ramakrishna said, don't try too hard to suppress your desires, because if you do that, then you find that then you have a reaction. He said that if you have a desire for something, like he gave the example of a Bengali sweet, a rasagola. Of course, it's not just Bengali, but Bengal is famous for their rasagolas. He said that if you have a strong desire for a rasagola, and you can't be at peace without having one, then go ahead and have it. Go ahead and have it. Don't frustrate yourself. Go ahead and have the rasagola. But as you're eating it, just think, okay, this is a rasagola, so no big deal. No big deal. That's a wonderful practice. Not that one time is going to be enough. No, do it over and over again. But gradually you get to the point where you see, I was dreaming about rasagolas, but when I actually eat it, it's just a little sweet taste in the mouth. That's all it is. That's all it is, a little sweet taste in the mouth. So what? What's the big deal? And so we can do that with everything. So so one thing is, don't try too hard to suppress desires. Some things it's better just to satisfy yourself with it, as long as it's moral, as long as it's not something that's immoral or illegal or something like that. Then go ahead and satisfy yourself with it. But at the same time, realize that see through it as you're enjoying it, and say that okay, so no big deal, no big deal. What's the big deal? When I was living in India the first time for many years, when I lived there for 7 years, I always liked Indian food and didn't have trouble with it, but didn't have any dislike for it or anything. So adjusting to it wasn't a problem. But of course, being away from your own native food for 7 years, there are things that you think about once in a while. So of course, besides chocolate, which in those days in India you couldn't get good chocolate. Now you can, but in those days there wasn't. In fact, people called hard candies, like lollipop candies, they call those chocolates. But one of the things I used to think about that I would really like to have, once in a while it would come up, I'd really love to have a fig Newton. I thought, gee, I would love to have a fig Newton right now. I came back to America, and one of the first things I wanted to get was a fig Newton. I had one, and I thought about this? Why in the world did I dream about fig Newtons? it's dry and not much taste, and what was the big deal? So most of our desires are like that. They look big before we have them, but when we get them, we see there's no big deal. So learn to do that. And the other thing is, one last thing to this, and I'll come to the next question, is that as we practice spiritual discipline, as we practice yoga, for instance, and as we practice meditative disciplines, one of the things that happens is that we begin to feel a distance between ourselves and our experience. We begin to feel that there's a distance between the experience or the input through the senses and myself, which gives me time to think about my response. How am I going to respond? Normally, we're like what they found in brain experiments, neurophysiological experiments with monkeys, that you put a probe anywhere in a monkey's brain and it reacts. There are no silent areas in the monkey's brain. Anywhere that you probe in the monkey's brain, it produces a response. In the human brain, there are large silent areas where you put a probe and nothing happens. Now that may speak badly for humans and well for monkeys, I don't know. But the idea is that humans, there are large parts of the brains where there's no reaction. And so we become like that, where we see a cupcake and we realize, I don't have to respond immediately. I have time. There's a spaciousness that comes to our experience where I realize that, no, I've got time and space to decide whether I want it or not. That if I don't eat it, I'm just going to make myself miserable. Or if I can just pass it by. Have that time to decide. And so meditation is a great help in that. It begins to create a space between us and our experience so that we have greater freedom of choice. There's a question back here, which I saw next, and then we'll come up to a boy. Oh, there are two there. Maitri, there are two questions there, and then we'll come up to a boy.
Thank you, Swamiji. And just as a follow-up on that, could we do the same with the kleshas, with the fears, where we can sort of visualize the things we think are just going to cause us tremendous suffering, and before they happen, if they even happen, try to get some distance up? Could you maybe help us with that kind of practice?
Yes. With fears, that's a good question about can't we do the same with fear? Because fear is quite different from attraction. In attraction, it's something where it doesn't grab us as much as fear does. Fear just incapacitates us, or we want to run immediately. And so, of course, there are situations that we should run from immediately. There are situations that are really dangerous and that we should just get out of. There's no harm in that. There's no harm in retreat. There's no harm in getting out of a bad situation. So we should first say that. But then there are fears and there are fears. There are fears which are nonsensical. There are fears which are not necessary. There are fears which are just sort of a basic fear that I always have, situations I'm always afraid of, which I don't need to be afraid of. And so those we need, different ones we need to handle in different ways. For instance, one of Sri Ramakrishna's direct disciples, Swami Trigunatitananda, he had a terrible fear of spiders. And once when he was a boy in his village in Bengal, he was swimming in a pond, and he went under the water and came up, and there were these water spiders all over the pond, and they covered him. And so they didn't bite him or anything, but it just frightened him terribly. And so he was terribly afraid of spiders. So when he was many years later, as a Swami, when he was in San Francisco, he used to keep rubber spiders all over his office so that he had to confront them all of the time. And so he got over his fear of spiders that way. I knew a woman from Baltimore, Carla, many years ago, who from the time she was 2 years old, she had an incapacitating fear of fish. And her fear of fish was so bad that if fish came on the television, she had to run out of the room. She couldn't go into the fish department of a grocery store. She couldn't look at pictures of fish, and it was really incapacitating. And this continued into her late teens, where it would just freeze her in fear. And so she realized that this is affecting my life in a terrible way. I have to get over it. So she finally had a friend lead her to the Smithsonian Institution and the museum in Washington, D.C., and take her into the fish exhibit where all sorts of fish were mounted and on display and so forth. And she would go in with her eyes closed with her hands. The friend would lead her in. And then when the friend would say, okay, we're there now, at first she'd just open a tiny bit so she'd see like just a little tiny speck of the fish's body. And that was all she could bear. And then she had to close, and then she'd be let out again. She did that day after day after day, week after week, like that, until finally she got to where she could look like that, and then she could take her hands down. And when I knew her, she was completely free of the fear. And so we have to find creative ways to get over our fears. But fears can be overcome. So we have to first distinguish between legitimate fears, where I could actually be harmed, and those which are just obsessive sort of fears. Oh, so Maitri, yes.
Thank you, Swami. I think I have a similar question, and I'm very afraid the advice will be the same. I find as I'm getting older that the attraction is like to the cupcake is way less disturbing to me than aversion. I think I'm making terrible noise with this.
That's okay.
That's okay.
So for instance, I can't stand noise that's not supposed to be there. I have a school with children, and next door is a barber shop that they crank the music up to 10. And even if you plug your ears, you can hear it, and I can't escape it. And I feel very angry and upset about it. It's easy to escape the cupcake. I can throw it in the trash.
Yes.
Or soap on it, but I can't escape the annoying noises.
Pour soap on them.
If you have tips for that.
Okay, yes. Yes, there are tips for everything, but what will work for one person may not work for another, but there are always some way out of everything like that, a situation out of that. So what I would do, because I've done it with other situations, including sound, and sound is something that is especially disturbing to us, because sound goes to us in a way that visual input doesn't go to us. That's why music affects us more than looking at art. We may be very moved by art, we may love visual art, but music affects us in a way that visual art doesn't. That's why you can sit and listen to music for hours, but you don't stand in front of the same painting looking at it for hours. You know, you look at it, enjoy it for a little bit, and then you move to something else. So sound is Klimmy, our own Klimmy, whom many of you knew. She used to say that that I'm losing my sight, but I pray to Mother, oh Mother, take my hearing instead. I get so tired of hearing noise and people chatter and all of that. I would gladly lose my ears, but I don't want to lose my sight. And so annoying noises are very annoying. So one thing that can be done, and I'm not saying that this will work for you, but you can try other things if it doesn't. And what I've done is to unavoidable noise that I can't get away from, is just to sit and listen to it, and to force myself to relax as I listen to it. Now, I'm not talking about listening to it for 8 hours a day while the barber shop is open, but from time to time, when you find yourself getting irritated, then just stop, sit down, and just listen to the music and realize that, you know, it doesn't matter. It's just sound. It's just sound. It doesn't matter. And put yourself in a peaceful place where it's the same thing that you can do with pain. If you have pain in the body that you can't get rid of, if you have, like people who have arthritis, that they've tried medicine and things, and there's a point where nothing's working. One thing that you can do is just to embrace the pain with your mind. Just to say, okay, I can't get rid of it. Let me just accept it. Okay, you were there, and I'm okay with that. I'm okay with it. You have to talk yourself into it, but that's okay. You were there. I embrace you. I hold you. That's okay. I'm not trying to get away from you. I'm not trying to push you away. You're there. That's okay. So that's one way. Now, oh boy, he had a question. Then I'll come to you because you had a question there before also. Yeah.
My question is around the relationship between tapas and vows.
Yeah.
Because it seems like all of the religions, or so many big teachers and even small teachers, talk about the value of tapas. I've heard so many teachers talk about that spiritual practice is nothing more than taking a step, stumbling, getting back up. It's always trial and error going forward. And yet I've heard so many teachers also say, be very careful about taking vows. And it seems like vows are just another aspect of tapas.
Yes, vows are an aspect of tapas. And the reason why teachers tell you, and it's good advice when they tell you be careful about vows, is that if you take a vow, then you should fulfill it. Because if you take a vow, the whole purpose of taking a vow is that you want to commit yourself so that this I'm going to do no matter what. I'm going to do it no matter what. I let death come, but I'm going to do this. And so you don't take a vow lightly. Like I'm going to take a vow not to speak for the next 30 years. And then you find that you're going crazy because you can't do it. You're not up to it. You shouldn't have taken the vow. So don't take vows lightly.
So, but is that, for a quick follow-up, so is that the difference between, say, normal tapas being, say, a small V vow? Because if I say, well, if I try to bring my mind under control, that's a certain vow to succeed in it. Is it the difference between a large V vow and a small V?
Yes, certainly. A small V vow means that you're just committing to yourself that I'm going to try to do this. And like in our order, we have the vows of brahmacharya before we take sannyasa later. When we become sannyasis, that's not really a vow-taking ceremony. It's really a change of identity ceremony. But the brahmacharya ceremony, where we become official brahmacharis, not just novices, not just probationers, that is a vow-taking ceremony. But in those vows, most of them are in the form, I will try my best to do this. So it's not, I will do this, with one or two exceptions. It's, I will try my best to do this. I will try my best not to see faults of others, and so forth.
One more question.
Okay, one more question. Oh, yes, that's right, you.
All right. When we do the meditation, and we have, for example, Samadhi, but when we are out of it, we're back again. Our ignorance is back. So how is it different from Sushupti, for example, deep sleep? Because
Yes,
we're back in the same state.
The difference between Sushupti and Samadhi. The difference is that in a real Samadhi, if we actually have Samadhi, even of a lower kind, we're not back in the same state. Even a lower Samadhi, the Nirvitarka Samadhi in the Yoga Sutras, or Savitarka Samadhi, and then Savichara Samadhi, Nirvitarka, Nirvichara, etc. Even a lower Samadhi is still a high spiritual experience, and it leaves a permanent change in the person. Deep sleep does not. And so deep sleep, we're the closest we ever are in our ordinary state to our self-identity. But it does us no good, except that we get good rest there. It does us that good. But it doesn't do any other good, except that it also gives us a basis for discrimination, for looking at that state and realizing what it is and learning from it. But as far as the state itself, we come back the same every day. But you can't go into an actual Samadhi state and remain the same. Now, in lower samadhis, up to the highest samadhi, there'll be a definite experiential purification of your mind and your sense of self and all of that. But you can slip back with time. But it leaves a mark on you nonetheless, and a noticeable mark. You feel that you're not the same person you were before you went into samadhi.
Can you be enlightened through Samadhi?
Yes. Now that there are many different opinions about the relationship between samadhi and enlightenment and realization and moksha. And so all of these things they're very different terms with different contexts and slightly different meanings. And so the general belief is that through Savikalpa Samadhi, there is a type of enlightenment. And Sri Ramakrishna said to some of his disciples, like Gopalarma, who had Savikalpa Samadhi, he said, you have had everything now. You've had everything. Everything is finished. And so she had a deep enough state of Samadhi, so he said that she had, her spiritual evolution had come to its culmination. Or there are those who say that only through Nirvikalpa Samadhi can one attain to the highest state. And there are others who say that the state of jnana, the state of knowledge of the self, is not dependent on a state. And so there are different people who approach the question of the ultimate state differently. Some who say that the state of knowledge is just a experiential knowledge that I am the self. And I'm not the body and I'm not the mind. And that experience is so deep and so profound that I never go back to thinking that I'm the body or the mind. And it doesn't matter, it's not dependent on Nirvikalpa Samadhi and things like that. There are others who say, no, that Nirvikalpa Samadhi is the ultimate state. And of course, for a devotee, one on the devotional path, then Savikalpa Samadhi is, or some state of ecstasy, the union with God in the vision, that's what they're seeking, not Nirvikalpa Samadhi. As Sri Ramakrishna said, some of his own disciples belong to the realm of the God with form, and they wouldn't take Nirvana or Nirvikalpa Samadhi even if it were offered to them. So we'll stop here.